Hi, everyone. Welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Bob Poole. Bob is the Director of Transportation Policy and the founder and former president of the Reason Foundation, a nonprofit research and educational institution based in Los Angeles. An MIT-trained engineer, Bob has advised the Federal Highway Administration, the Federal Transit Administration, the White House Office of Policy Development, and a number of state DOTs on transportation policy. His research papers have helped to introduce long-term toll concessions, hot lanes, hot networks, and truck-only toll lanes into US policy. Bob was a member of the TRB Special Committee on the Long-Term Viability of Fuel Taxes for Highway Funding, and is a member of the TRB Standing Committees on Congestion Pricing and on Managed Lanes. Bob, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
Beautiful. Well, this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and we talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And today I want to give a special shout out to the Platinum sponsors, the 23 organizations that support us financially throughout the year and also provide very valuable thought leadership to the IBTTA Board of Directors. Also, thanks to all of the IBTTA members. We know this has been a very unusual and tough year for everybody, and we appreciate your sticking with us and joining us on all of these virtual events. We've had more than 6,000 attendees at IBTTA's virtual events this year, which is more than 3 times the number of attendees we had at all of our in-person events last year. Also, thanks to Cubic Transportation Systems for your fun and whimsical tweets about Café IBTTA. And thanks to TransCore. They are our first digital advertiser on our website. They're launching a new product and using the IBTTA website as their platform. So check it out. Well, as always, we are taking your questions. Use the chat function on your screen to ask questions at any time and set it to all panelists and attendees. Now, we want to get you engaged early. So in the chat function, I would ask you to type one word or phrase that describes your feelings about mileage-based user fees or vehicle miles traveled charging. Do it right now. One word or phrase that describes your feelings about mileage-based user fees or vehicle miles traveled charging. All right, we're getting some good responses here. Yeah, very good. Necessary, hard to enforce, waiting for, imperative, necessary, utility, let's do it, future, rational, sensible, simple, eventually, equitable, a must, great idea, why not, fair, there's a couple of fairs, much fairer, future, good ideas. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much for your response, and I'm sure we'll get back to some of those comments in the rest of the questions. Well, Bob, let's talk about the paper that inspired express lanes. Most think tank experts know that their best ideas or recommendations could take years, if not decades, to bear fruit, if it happens at all.
If it happens at all.
If it happens at all. But Bob, you had the unusual good fortune earlier in your career to see some of your work put to practical use. In 1988, you and the Reason Foundation released a paper called Private Tollways, Resolving Gridlock in Southern California. In this paper, you combine private finance, high-speed transponder tolling, and variable pricing to be applied to new lanes added to congested freeways. Not long after that, the state of California drew on those ideas in Orange County when building the 91 express lanes. Tell us about that, Bob.
It's very exciting to be involved in this. I've been researching congestion pricing for a number of years before writing that paper, but I couldn't figure out, and nobody could figure out, how to do variable pricing without toll booths or something. It just didn't seem like it could work. Then I learned Amtrak had developed the first toll tag and were installing it in the Dallas North Tollway. I called them, flew out there, spent a whole day with them, and the final thing I learned, they could read it accurately at 65 or 75 mile per hour. And the light bulb went off. I said, this is the answer. So I combined the private financing, as you said, the different ideas into this paper. and wrote about it in the LA Times. And the Caltrans office headquarters called, the governor's office called, said, give us a copy of this paper. And that led to, we helped them organize a workshop with private sector people to say, yeah, if you could make this legal, we would be interested. They got the legislation passed the very next year, 1989, authorizing 4 private toll projects. They appointed me to a steering committee to help manage the competition that they have. And the top ranked project and the first one to be built was the 91 Express Lanes, opened in December 95. I was at the groundbreaking, at the ribbon cutting. I still have the hard hat from that. It was very gratifying. As you say, it's a think tanker's dream to have that kind of response to a policy proposal.
All right. Well, Bob, we know you've written a lot since then. You're a prolific writer, a prolific researcher. Let's talk about the category mistake of highways, or a term that you use. In 2018, you authored a book titled Rethinking America's Highways, a 21st Century Vision for Better Infrastructure. And in chapter 1, you wrote, when it comes to highways, America has made a category mistake. In the mistaken belief that highways are the kind of thing that only government can provide, we created a 20th century system based on government provision. And in the belief, which was partly true prior to electronic tolling, that charging direct fees would be costly and inconvenient. We adopted a second-based approach of user taxes on fuel. The consequences of this category mistake are increasingly evident. Bob, what does that mean? Tell us more about that.
We have chronic problems that are the same or worse today as when I started doing transportation policy in 1988. Congestion that's most of the time gets worse all the time. State of poor repair with a huge backlog of deferred maintenance. We don't build most highways durable enough. The life cycle cost is way larger than it should be because they're built cheaply. Not toll roads. And that's when I learned more about toll roads and got to know IBTTA and so forth, I saw, wow, what a difference. The toll roads that your members operate worldwide are businesses. And they charge their customers, they treat their customers directly. They can only finance projects that make sense because the benefits are greater than the cost. You can finance them with bonds and in the case of P3s with equity. And so I've worked on this idea off and on for 25 years, and finally decided if it's ever going to happen, we really need to put the case together in book length, get the academic community aware of it, get the transportation community to see the whole picture. And so that was the genesis of the book. And it was a struggle to write while doing all my regular work. And it was a struggle to get published. The University of Chicago Press put me through the ringer. It was like at least like defending a PhD dissertation. They had outside reviewers. I had to go through a second round of reviews because I thought the first reviewers were too favorable. They must be people that I knew closely and so forth. So anyway, they ended up publishing it. And the good news is that paperback is going to come out in December or January. And I'm actually getting royalties from it. The hardcover is doing well enough. I did about 15 academic presentations on it over a year and a half. I spoke at IBTTA, at ARTBA, AASHTO, the other major transportation conferences. So the ideas are getting around, but of course the monthly newsletter that I do, the Surface Transportation Innovations, continues to keep these ideas out, and ongoing Reason Foundation transportation policy studies do that as well. So I'm glad I did it. It was a huge amount of work, but it really kind of sums up most of the things I've learned about transportation, but certainly about highway transportation policy in my whole career. So it's very gratifying to see a good response to it.
Bob, one of the terms that you use in the book has to do with the public utility model. And
Right.
You compare highways, or especially tolled highways, to the public utility model of electric utilities or water utilities, et cetera. Drill down a little bit more deeply into that idea of the public utility model.
Well, electric utility, all of our utilities, whether they're owned by government or by investor-owned companies, water, electricity, natural gas service, telecommunications, they all have a direct customer-provider relationship. You pay for exactly what you use, and the money, the company uses the money to build, operate, and maintain the system. With highways, it's a completely different thing. The customer is not the people who drive on the highways. The customer for the state DOT is the legislature, because that's who it has to satisfy. That's where it gets its money. So those highways are the kind of state-owned enterprise that we saw in the Soviet Union, not as bad, but in principle, and as we saw all over Europe in the era before the large-scale privatization movement that was started by Margaret Thatcher in the late 1980s. And so they realized in Europe, and we already had mostly investor-owned utilities, except for highways, with the exception of, obviously, of toll roads. And now that we've started in the United States to import from Europe and Australia the long-term private P3 concession or franchise, that brings so now we have the parallel models of the toll agency as a government business and the toll concession as an investor-owned business. And so these are presented in the book, the parallel ways of moving toward a true highway utility model, with both of those models being applicable and relevant to the future that I think we really need to do in this country.
My guest today is Bob Poole, the Director of Transportation Policy with the Reason Foundation. We are taking your questions. Let's see. We are taking your questions, and please put them into the chat function there. And while we're waiting for your questions to come in, Bob, I have another question for you. And this has to do with addressing the politics of interstate tolling. Mm-hmm. Another focus area for you, which is near and dear to my heart, relates to tolling the U.S. interstate highways. Yep. Under the FAST Act of 2015, Congress directed the Transportation Research Board and the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a major study on the actions needed to upgrade and restore the interstate highway system to its role as a premier system that meets the growing and shifting demands of the 21st century. Here's a picture of me talking to the Maine Blue Ribbon Commission on the future funding for highways in the state of Maine. So you testified before the TRB committee overseeing that study in March 2017. And in your presentation, you talked about the many weaknesses of the gas tax and the strengths of tolling to rebuild the interstate highway system. Tell us more about that, Bob.
Right. Well, I thought the report that they came out with was excellent on diagnosing the problem. They said the original interstate is wearing out. It'll cost about $1 trillion to rebuild and modernize with lane additions and so forth where needed. But then when it came to how to do this, they fudged. They had all kinds of good stuff in the report about financing, long-term financing, about tolls, about the transition to mileage-based user fees. But they punted when they got to the end and said, all right, well, we need a massive new federal gas tax that will generate this 50 billion a year for 20 years. And that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen. And so I wrote a reason study that came out the spring of 2019 saying, really restating the case for toll financing, why it needs to be financed. You need the money up front, corridor by corridor, to rebuild and modernize. You want to have the customer-provider relationship, and this could be the first step in the transition to mileage-based user fees, because interstates plus urban freeways constitute 35% of all the vehicle miles of travel in the country. And the limited access roads are ideal for state-of-the-art transponder tolling. We don't have to wait for some new technology that we hope will not have privacy concerns and so forth. If we start with the interstate transition to mileage-based user fee, we get more than a third of it done if all the states do it. And then, give some breathing space. The remaining gas tax money can go for the other roads while we figure out, hopefully get some really more customer-friendly technology for the lower level roads. But this also allows a per mile charge on the interstates that will be sufficient for the big task of rebuilding and modernizing. And it should not be a cross subsidy from the little old lady who never drives on the interstates and pays the same gas tax as people who drive on the interstate. The charge needs to be higher, needs to be a proper toll that covers the capital, operating, and maintenance costs of the rebuilt system. But it also needs, we need to build trust in the public that this is not an add-on additional tax on top of the fuel tax. So part of the idea that I've been promoting and is that as we start converting non-toll interstates to toll finance, the state needs to give a rebate on the state fuel taxes for the only for the miles driven on that rebuilt, newly tolled corridor. And that proves good faith to the customers that, all right, this is not an add-on, this is a replacement. And if that principle gets established initially with the interstates, it will become a lot more credible when we need to transition all the other roads.
Bob, here's a question from Tim Stewart with the E470 Public Highway Authority. Bob, what are your thoughts or theories on how telework and related concepts will impact the funding models offered through tolling?
Very good question, and it's clear that there's going to be a permanent increase from the current, about 5% of people telecommute basically full time. I would think it'll be at least 10% once the pandemic is over and people and companies have seen that for a lot of jobs this works. Now there may also be some fallout of some people switching from mass transit and wanting to be on the road instead to protect themselves, even maybe after there's a vaccine. So that will offset some. I think we're going to have some relief, near-term relief over the next 5 years in traffic congestion because of the permanent increase in telecommuting. I don't think long-term, I think the long-term projections of VMT growth in a growing economy will still be very much there. And I think the consensus in the autonomous vehicle community is that an AV future is likely to have more VMT than a non-AV future. That wasn't the case 5 years ago. That's what the more current thinking is. So I think the long-term future of toll revenue, including on managed lanes, is still quite sound. And so the rating agencies so far seem to agree with that.
Bob, here's a question from Aaron Hake in California. The California legislature and governor, as well as some leaders in Congress, and I'm sure in other states, have advanced anti-road policies on environmental grounds. How should the toll industry respond to this push to reduce VMT?
Well, I think the wrong answer is to reduce VMT. The right answer is to promote the transition to non-petroleum vehicles, which is probably going to happen faster than a lot of people think. I mean, it's tough to say, well, we're going to need roads anyway, so we should keep building them, because we may get policies at the federal level from Congress in the next few years that would emulate what California is trying to do of making it very, very difficult to add any capacity to the highway system. I think the toll community ought to be strongly opposed to that and pointing out the benefits of mobility that are offered, the multimodal benefits for buses, for freight transportation. Trucking industry is growing steadily, and with more and more online shopping, the trucking industry is going to have a very, very bright future of growth, and that means more VMT alone. And the trucking industry is also, every single trucking manufacturer in Europe, America, and Japan are developing electric, whether battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks. That transition is going to happen also. So it's a question, if we're taking a serious long-term view, and we're not going to build a whole lot of highway capacity overnight, the long-term view says this is going to be a non-petroleum propulsion future. That's why we need the mileage-based user fee transition as well. So stress the mileage-based user fee and the non-petroleum vehicles, and say the highway future is going to be much greener because of those things.
Bob, you mentioned the trucking industry and electric trucks, and one of the things that has been a bright spot during this COVID-19 pandemic is that truck traffic has remained relatively stable on toll facilities, even while automobile traffic has declined sharply. The need for goods to be moved around the country hasn't been diminished by that.
No.
So Richard Ridings mentions that he worked with you in the early 90s on the 91 express lanes, and he asks, how do we accelerate infrastructure improvements and save lives and money? There's a big question.
Well, I do. Well, I think one of the best things we could do is to really try to get the toll-financed interstate reconstruction off dead center, get consensus on the need to do that, because these are the highways, they're inherently the safest, but when you have obsolete interchanges that have left exits where nobody designs them that way today, that create huge bottlenecks for trucking and motorists and commuters, we get a lot of improvements by really having the financing ability to really do these large scale projects. And most of this is not new roads. It's making the existing roads better and safer and less congested. And I think there's an awful lot of benefits from doing that. And that's what we really ought to be focusing on.
Bob, there are a couple of questions that relate to public opinion and public policy, elected official attitudes toward tolling. You're obviously a vocal proponent of tolling. Why is there such a large disconnect between millions of drivers who willingly use toll roads every day and public opinion surveys that suggest broad support for tolling versus the gas tax, and those who think, and many of them elected officials, that tolling is unjust, elected officials, truckers, and others?
Well, I've done a lot of talking with trucking industry people, senior people, heads of state, and I've given presentations at 5 trucking conferences in the last year, primarily due to my book. And the trucking industry has a lot of gripes. They object, for example, to revenue diversion, what the legislature forced on the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission which has led to huge every annual toll increases that are basically a tax only on the people who use the Pennsylvania Turnpike to pay for transit in cities around Pennsylvania. So they object to toll diversion. They object to what some states have proposed doing, which is to which Rhode Island is doing, putting up toll facilities on highways, charging tolls, and then sort of promising eventually you're going to get better roads out of this. I say no. The answer: get public support and trucker support. You've got to deliver value for the money. You don't start the tolling until there's something better for people to use. So there's policies like that have created a bad image for trucking. And also, mostly the trucking industry talks about double taxation, of paying fuel taxes and tolls. If the road is financed entirely by tolls, there is no good reason other than inconvenience and bureaucracy to also levy the gas tax on the miles driven there. We can do that now electronically. Truckers on the New York Thruway and the Mass Turnpike have been able to get rebates of fuel taxes for decades, but now it's been automated by BestPass, which provides tolling services to hundreds of thousands of trucks all over the country. In those 2 states, they automatically, the file gets sent to the Department of Motor Vehicles for the miles driven and the amount of estimated diesel fuel consumed, and they get rebates. And so this is not something unimaginable or hard to do. It's being done right now, and it should be the policy as we move into broaden tolling. And I think that will also help, that people see that they're not being charged twice for the same thing.
Bob, here's a question from Neil Gray. There's a precedent in the toll industry of agencies themselves acting as a bidder on projects, essentially public-public partnerships, reducing the issues of a profit required in public-private partnerships, which can be a political liability. Is this more akin to your thoughts on utility models?
Well, it's another way of doing utility model. I don't object. I mean, since I'm perfectly happy with the toll agencies as they have grown in the United States, except for the political manipulation that sometimes comes about when legislatures try to use them as cash cows or honeypots and grab money from them. So for toll agency to be bidding, I think as long as it's a fair competition with investor-owned companies, I don't see a problem. But that really depends on the DOT or whoever is helping the competition being able to do a genuinely fair value for money estimation and look at the all of the benefits and all of the costs with the alternatives, and that has not always been done in the past. And so it's a question of doing it fairly. I mean, I do think there are some inherent advantages to the toll concession model. I think it is more insulated from politics on things like treating the toll road as a cash cow, and and the equity financing means that there's, in a time of recession, there's more of a cushion because it's not 100% debt. And that's a benefit also that is often not taken into account.
Bob, I'm seeing several questions about P3s and concessions of toll facilities. Just thinking back in the mid 2000s, in the long-term lease of the Indiana Toll Road, a private operator, it was a big deal, and we hadn't seen anything like that in the U.S. before. And I remember at the time, Mitch Daniels, the governor of Indiana, was getting lots of questions from his fellow governors about, hey, how did you do this? And can we do this? Right. So give us your views on the likelihood and desirability of more toll road concessions, or as some call it, asset recycling, like the Indiana Toll Road.
Right. I think there's a lot to be said for that model. In terms, as some of the things I said about insulating the toll system from political opportunism, and in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Reason Foundation next week on the 25th of August, assuming all goes well, will be releasing a study that looks at asset recycling of major toll roads as a way for states to try to cope with the horrendous financial problems they're going to be having over the next few years due to the pandemic and the loss of state revenue across the board. And so the study looks at the potential asset value, net asset value after paying off existing bonds of major toll roads, and says, this worked pretty well for Indiana. They got a 10-year fully funded highway improvement program statewide from the lease proceeds. They got more transparent oversight and more capital investment in the Indiana Toll Road to revamp the service plazas, to widen in some stretches and repave. So I think it's been a net plus for Indiana transportation, and some of those same benefits could be available in other states. I think the idea sounds so radical these days that the first reaction is likely to be, oh my God, how could we possibly think of that? But with the financial distress of state governments in the next few years, I think the door may be open to at least take a look at this and see whether it has benefits for them.
Bob, I've been reading your book, Rethinking America's Highways, with great interest, and I noticed that the cover photo is an image of the Millau Viaduct in France. So tell us, Rethinking America's Highways, why the Millau Viaduct on the cover?
It's a toll-financed bridge. It's the world's highest bridge. It's done as a long-term P3 concession, a 70-year concession. Has huge benefits for customers. It saves 45 minutes of travel going across that deep valley instead of underneath. And I think it's the most beautiful bridge in the world. So it's a picture of what we could have more of in the United States if we got more serious about highways as utilities that are self-funded by their customers. And they asked me at the Chicago Press, what would you like on the cover? And it was a no-brainer. That's what I wanted. And they were very good about cooperating and finding a very good image of it.
I guess a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in this case, an entire book. This is what the future looks like. If people invest, if we go to tolling and think of it as the utility model.
This is the kind of future we can expect.
Bob, I'm just going to pause for a moment while I make a couple of announcements. Next week, our guest on Café IBTTA is Diane Scacchetti, the Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Transportation and second Vice President of IBTTA. Today at 1 p.m., the Blockchain Subcommittee is presenting a webinar entitled Blockchain and Mobility Services. Those of you who remember Randy Cole from the Ohio Turnpike will be pleased to know that he will be there to help moderate, along with our friend Matt Milligan from Milligan Partners and a distinguished panel of experts from Moby, Citopia, and Daimler Financial Services. There's still time to register. Check the home page for today's events. Next week, August 25th, procurement is a collaborative process. How do we achieve success? It's a meetup between the Council of Platinum sponsors and the IBTTA DBE membership. It includes several toll agency experts and moderated by Deanne Heath of the Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority. And let's not forget our annual meeting. It's September 14th through 16th. Get fired up. Let's make this the biggest gathering of toll industry professionals in the history of the world. You can do it. It's free to IBTTA members, and we're excited about welcoming lots of new attendees. Visit ibtta.org/events for all the details and to register for upcoming events. Bob, it's been a delight to have you with us today. It's great to hear your perspective on these fascinating issues.
Thanks so much, Pat. IBTTA is my favorite organization, so I really appreciate the time to talk with you today.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, and thanks to our viewers. Be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bob.